Hey guys, tonight we're going to transport ourselves back to a time when Home Sweet Home was less of a Pinterest board and more of a drafty wooden cage designed to keep the bears out but the frost very much in. Imagine you're lying under a pile of itchy wool, listening to the wind scream through cracks in the wall that weren't there yesterday. It's the 1800s, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. You'd likely tap out the moment you realize your smart home features consisted of a single candle and a bucket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our global community of insomniacs growing. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the center of a small clearing, the late autumn sun dipping below a horizon of skeletal trees. The air has changed today. It's no longer the crisp, refreshing breeze of October. It has taken on a metallic, sharp edge that bites at the inside of your nose. This is the first real frost. You look at your home, a humble log cabin you've spent the last 6 weeks frantically assembling. To a modern eye, it looks rustic and charming, perhaps like something you'd pay $400 a night for on a glamping website. But to you, standing there in boots that have been damp since Tuesday, it looks like a giant precarious Jenga set made of wet trees. You see, you built this house in a hurry. You had to. The frontier doesn't give you a grace period or a move-in extension. The logs you used were green, which is a polite historical way of saying they were still full of sap and life when you notched them. In the world of 19th century construction, green wood is the ultimate buy now, regret later decision. Mainstream history tells us that the log cabin became the symbol of American grit because it could be erected using nothing but an axe and a raising bee. A sort of 1800s version of a very dangerous, unpaid group project where your neighbors helped you lift heavy timber in exchange for whiskey and a future favor. But because you were racing the calendar, you didn't have 2 years to let that oak or pine season. You stacked them fresh, and now, as the temperature plummets, the physics of drying wood is about to become your primary personality trait. As the moisture leaves those logs, they begin to shrink and warp. It's like buying a perfectly fitted suit and then watching it turn into a crop top the moment you step outside. You can actually hear it if you listen closely, a slow, rhythmic creaking as the fibers of the trees contract. Historians still argue whether the specific design of these cabins was a truly unique frontier evolution, or if we owe the entire concept to Swedish and Finnish settlers who brought their Nordic carpentry secrets to the Delaware Valley, eventually teaching the rest of the world how to survive a blizzard in a box of sticks. Regardless of who invented it, you're the one living in it now. You step inside, and the floor beneath your feet isn't polished hardwood. It's punchin'. Logs split down the middle with the flat side facing up. It feels like walking on a series of very firm, very uneven balanced beams. The gaps between the wall logs, which you thought were tight a month ago, are starting to yawn open. It's as if the house is slowly opening its mouth to let the winter in. You realize that your autumn construction was a bit too optimistic. You thought the thick bark and the heavy weight of the timber would be enough to keep the atmosphere at bay, but the wind is already proving you wrong. It doesn't just blow against the house, it investigates it. It finds every minute tremor in the wood, every poorly notched corner, and sends a thin, icy finger of air inside to touch the back of your neck. The realization hits you with the weight of a falling tree. You aren't just living in a house, you are living inside a drying experiment. You look at the roof, made of shakes or hand-split shingles. They were supposed to overlap perfectly, but as the wood dries, they start to curl like dead leaves. If you look up, you can see tiny pinpricks of the darkening sky. On a summer night, that might be romantic. A way to count the stars while you drift off. Tonight, those holes look like leaks in a submarine. You're about 10 minutes away from a full-blown existential crisis involving clay and straw, but for now, you just stand there watching your breath bloom in front of you in the dimming light. The room is a single, multi-purpose space that serves as your kitchen, bedroom, and living room, essentially a 150 square foot studio apartment, but with more spiders and significantly less plumbing. You haven't even had time to build a proper loft yet, so your entire life is compressed onto the damp, cold floor. You feel a strange sense of betrayal from the forest. You spent weeks sweating over these trees, bruising your shoulders and callousing your hands, and now they are literally shrinking away from you. It's the ultimate ghosting. There's a quirky tidbit often found in old settlers' journals about the moon phase logic of cutting timber. Some of your neighbors swore that if you cut the trees during a waning moon, the sap would be lower in the trunk and the logs wouldn't shrink as much. You, being a person of science, or perhaps just being very tired, didn't pay much attention to the lunar cycle. Now, looking at a half-inch gap that has appeared near the corner of the west wall, you're starting to wonder if the moon has a personal vendetta against you. Your heating system is an open hearth that looks like it belongs in a medieval castle, though it functions more like a very expensive way to turn wood into smoke without actually warming the room. The masonry is questionable at best. You use river stones and a prayer, and as the first frost hardens the ground outside, the stones themselves seem to be radiating a deep, ancient cold rather than holding any warmth. You realize that cozy is a word that hasn't been invented yet, at least not in any way that applies to your current situation. In your world, cozy just means not currently dying of hypothermia. You sit down on a stump you've repurposed as a chair, because who has time for furniture when you're busy not dying? And pull your coat tighter. The transition from autumn to winter on the frontier isn't a gradual slide, it's a door slamming shut. And you're on the wrong side of the latch. You start to think about the chinking and daubing you'll have to do tomorrow, the endless cycle of patching the cracks that the wood will inevitably create as it continues its slow motion shrug. It's a battle of attrition, you versus the physics of timber. And as the sun finally disappears, leaving the cabin in a thick, heavy gloom, you realize the first frost was just a warning shot. The real storm is coming, and your house is currently a collection of very cold, very leaky whistles. You look at that gap in the wall again, the one that's currently whistling a high-pitched, mournful C sharp, and realize that your evening isn't going to be spent relaxing by the fire. Instead, you have to engage in the frontier version of an emergency home repair. In the 21st century, if your window has a draft, you might put some weather stripping down, or if you're feeling particularly lazy, just turn up the Nest thermostat. But here, in your cabin, you are the maintenance department, the architect, and the manual laborer all rolled into one cold, shivering package. You need to chink and daub. To the uninitiated, these sound like the names of a failed 1970s detective duo. But to a pioneer, they are the difference between waking up and, well, not waking up. You reach for your bucket of daubing material, which you've kept near the hearth so it wouldn't turn into a solid brick of ice. This mixture is essentially your home security system against the elements. Mainstream history often breezes over this part of cabin life, focusing on the heroic felling of trees, but the real heroes were the people who spent hours knee-deep in freezing mud. Chinking refers to the solid stuff you wedge between the logs, bits of wood, stones, or even corn cobs, while daubing is the plaster that seals it all in. It's like the grout in your bathroom tiles. If your bathroom was located in the middle of a haunted forest and the grout was made of things you found under a bush. As you scoop a handful of the mixture out, you feel the gritty, cold texture against your skin. It's a delightful cocktail of river clay, water, and straw. If you were lucky, you might have added some lime or even a bit of hog hair to give it tensile strength. It's the 19th century version of fiber reinforced concrete, except it smells significantly more like a farm. There's a quirky tidbit often tucked away in old builders' guides suggesting that the best daubing included human hair or shredded old rags, because when it comes to survival, you don't throw anything away. You are literally plugging the holes in your house with the remnants of your old life. It's recycling, but with a desperate, I don't want to be a human popsicle energy. You walk over to the offending gap and begin to slap the mud into place. It's not a graceful process. It's less like a master mason at work and more like a toddler trying to fix a birthday cake with a handful of mashed potatoes. The wind is pushing against you from the other side, a physical force trying to shove the mud back into your face. You have to push harder, working the clay into the crevices of the bark. Historians still argue whether the specific orientation of the moss used in the chinking, roots facing inward or outward, actually made a measurable difference in heat retention, or if it was just a regional superstition passed down by grandfathers who liked to have something to complain about. Either way, you're using moss you scraped off a damp rock this morning, and you're not particularly concerned about its botanical alignment. You just want it to stop the wind from stealing your soul. The smell of the wet earth is overwhelming in the small space. It's a heavy, damp, mineral scent that reminds you of a fresh grave, a thought you quickly push aside. You try to tell yourself it's earthy and artisanal, like a high-end spa treatment. This is your new skincare routine, glacial clay and frontier desperation. It's great for the pores, though arguably terrible for the nerves. You move to the next log and the next. Every time you finish a section, the cabin feels a fraction of a degree warmer. Or perhaps that's just a physical exertion tricking your brain into thinking you're not freezing. Your fingers are starting to go numb, turning a pale, ghostly blue at the tips. You have to stop occasionally to blow on them or tuck them under your armpits, which is a very undignified way to stay warm, but there's no one here to judge your lack of elegance. You realize that your house is basically a giant wooden quilt, and you are currently sewing the seams with mud. It's a fragile existence. If the clay dries too quickly, it will crack. If it stays too wet, it will slump out of the gap like a tired tongue. It requires a Goldilocks level of perfection that you are currently too exhausted to provide. Modern life has taught us to expect set it and forget it solutions. Your Wi-Fi works until it doesn't. Your roof stays on until a hurricane arrives. But here, the house is a living, breathing entity that requires constant negotiation. You are in a long-term relationship with these logs, and right now, they are being very difficult. You find yourself talking to the wood, whispering, "Stay put, you stubborn oak," as if the timber might actually listen. You've reached a level of isolation where the inanimate objects are your only social circle, and frankly, the oak is a better listener than some of the people you knew back east. As you reach the upper logs near the roof line, you have to stand on your tiptoes, your muscles protesting every move. The daub is dripping down your sleeves, cold and slimy. It's a far cry from the romanticized oil paintings of pioneers sitting peacefully by a fire. Those painters usually conveniently forgot to include the part where the pioneer is covered in river muck and swearing at a piece of moss. You think about how strange it is that humans ever decided this was a good idea. We left perfectly good caves for this. We traded stability for the great outdoors, which is mostly just the great place where things try to freeze you. Finally, you step back. The major gaps are filled. The cabin looks like it's been through a messy divorce with a swamp, but the whistling has stopped. The silence that follows is heavy and thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional thump of snow sliding off the roof. You look at your hands, caked in drying mud, cracked and sore. You've won this round of the Wall versus Wind Championship. It's a small victory, but on the frontier, small victories are the only ones that matter. You know, deep down, that this is only a temporary fix. As the winter deepens and the logs continue to shrink, new gaps will appear. The clay will crack and fall out in the middle of the night, forced out by the sheer pressure of the cold. You'll be doing this again in a week or maybe tomorrow. It's a ritual. It's the pioneer version of scrolling through your phone before bed. Just a repetitive, slightly mind-numbing task that you do because you don't know how else to end the day. You wipe your hands on a piece of burlap, feeling the grit fall to the floor. The cabin is as sealed as it's ever going to be. Now, the real challenge begins, actually trying to sleep in it. You turn your attention toward the hearth, the literal heart of your home, and, unfortunately, your only defense against becoming a permanent part of the local permafrost. In the modern world, heating is invisible. You press a button or adjust a dial, and warm air magically flows from the vents like a silent, invisible hug. But in this cabin, heat is a loud, temperamental, and incredibly greedy roommate. Your fireplace is a massive structure of stone and clay that takes up nearly an entire wall, yet despite its size, it's about as efficient as trying to fill a sieve with water. You've come to realize that 90% of the heat generated by your hard-earned timber has a very clear preference. It would much rather be outside, floating toward the stars through the chimney than staying in here to keep your toes attached. Mainstream history often notes that the open hearth was the focal point of the American pioneer home, serving as the sole source of heat, light, and cooking. It sounds cozy in a textbook, but the reality is a physics nightmare. Because of the way these chimneys are constructed, they create a massive draft. It's like a giant vacuum cleaner for air. For every cubic foot of warm air the fire produces, it sucks in an equal amount of freezing air through every crack you just spent an hour trying to plug. It's a zero-sum game where the house is the loser. You are currently experiencing the pioneer paradox. The closer you get to the fire, the more the cold wind is pulled in through the gaps behind you. It's a bit like having a high-speed internet connection that only works if you're standing directly on top of the router, but the router is also capable of setting your eyebrows on fire. You look at the chimney itself. If you were lucky and had access to good stone, it's a solid masonry job. If you were in a hurry, and you were, it might be a cat and clay chimney. This is one of those quirky tidbits of frontier life that makes modern fire marshals weep. It's essentially a wooden crate lined with thick layers of mud and straw. You literally built a chimney out of flammable materials and then started a fire inside it. It's the 19th century equivalent of charging your phone with a frayed cable you found in a puddle. You have to constantly inspect the lining to make sure the clay hasn't cracked, because if the flames reach the cats, the small bundles of straw and clay, the whole house becomes a giant Roman candle. There is a long-standing scholarly debate among architectural historians regarding the placement of these hearths. Some argue that the transition from the central hearth, common in early European designs, to the end wall chimney was a purely functional adaptation to create more floor space in small cabins. Others suggest it was a cultural shift, a move away from the communal fire circle of the Middle Ages toward a more modern and organized domestic layout. To you, shivering on your puncheon floor, this debate feels a bit academic. Whether the fire is in the middle or the end, it's currently doing a better job of lighting up the soot than warming your blankets. You reach for a backlog. This is the heavy hitter of the fireplace world, a log so large and green that it requires 2 hands and a significant amount of grunting to move. You place it at the very back of the hearth. Its job isn't to burn quickly, its job is to act as a heat reflector and to stay smoldering for days. In front of it, you stack your smaller, seasoned 4 sticks. Watching the flames catch, you realize that managing a fire is less like a chore and more like a high-stakes game of Tetris. If you pack the wood too tightly, the fire suffocates. Too loose, and it roars through your winter supply in a single night. You have to weigh the choice between burning your large logs for immediate warmth or saving them for those actually cold nights in January that the old timers keep warning you about with a terrifying twinkle in their eyes. The light from the hearth is your only illumination. It's a flickering, orange glow that casts long, spindly shadows against the log walls. These shadows dance and jump, making the tools hanging on the pegs look like they're reaching for you. It's atmospheric, sure, but it's also exhausting for the eyes. There's no soft white setting here. It's either flickering firelight or pitch blackness with nothing in between. You try to read a small, tattered book, but the light is so inconsistent it's like trying to watch a movie through a strobe light. You eventually give up, realizing that your eyes are better used for monitoring the hearth for popping coals. Western woods like hemlock or cedar are notorious for popping. They contain little pockets of moisture or sap that, when heated, explode with the sound of a small firecracker, sending glowing red embers flying into the room. Since your floor is made of wood and your bedding is made of dry straw and wool, a single stray spark is a legitimate game over scenario. You've developed a sort of sixth sense for the sound, a sharp crack that has you jumping up to stomp out a coal before it can burrow into your floorboards. It's not exactly the recipe for a relaxing evening. As the fire settles into a steady burn, you feel that strange sensation of being front cooked and back frozen. Your face is flushed and warm, almost uncomfortably so, while the skin on your back is prickling with the chill of the room. It's a thermal tug of war. You find yourself rotating like a piece of meat on a rotisserie, trying to distribute the heat evenly across your body. You turn 45 degrees every 5 minutes, a human sundial measuring the passage of a very cold night. You also have to deal with the scent. It's not just the smell of wood smoke, it's the smell of everything that has ever happened in this cabin. The hearth is where you cook, which means the scent of rendered salt. Pork and cornmeal mush is baked into the very stones. It's a heavy, greasy aroma that lingers in the damp air. To a modern nose, it might be overwhelming, but to you, it's just the smell of survival. It's the scent of, at least we have food. You poke at the embers with a charred stick, watching the sparks fly up the flue. You think about how much of your life is now dedicated to the worship of this pile of burning wood. You spend your days cutting it, your evenings stacking it, and your nights worrying about it. It's a demanding deity. But as the wind howls outside, rattling the heavy door, you look at the orange heart of the fire and feel a flicker of gratitude. It's inefficient, it's dangerous, and it's a lot of work. But it's the only thing standing between you and the blue, silent cold of the woods. You settle back, feeling the heat finally start to soak into your bones, knowing that in about 2 hours you'll have to do the whole rotation dance all over again. Eventually, the weight of the day, the tree felling, the mud slapping, the constant battle against the encroaching frost begins to pull at your eyelids. It's time to move from the relative warmth of the hearth to the area you optimistically refer to as the bedroom. In your cabin, this isn't a separate suite with blackout curtains and a white noise machine. It's a corner of the room where the drafts are slightly less aggressive. You look toward your bed and your spine immediately begins to preemptively ache. If you were expecting a plush, multi-layered memory foam mattress with cooling gel technology, you've made a catastrophic wrong turn in time. Your bed is a one-poster, a piece of frontier engineering that is less like furniture and more like a permanent wooden protest against the concept of human comfort. A mainstream historical fact you might encounter in a museum is that these beds were built directly into the structure of the cabin itself. You didn't go to a store and buy a bed frame. You grew it, chopped it, and bolted it to the wall. The one poster consists of a single vertical leg standing out in the room with 2 horizontal rails notched into the log walls. It's efficient, sturdy, and about as forgiving as a marble slab. Because it's literally part of the house, every time the wind shakes the cabin or a log contracts with a loud crack, the vibration travels directly into your ribs. It's like sleeping inside a giant wooden tuning fork that only plays the low temperature blues. You climb onto the punch-in base, These are the same split logs used for the floor, and they have all the ergonomic support of a pile of bricks. To soften the blow, you have a tick, a large, heavy fabric bag that you've stuffed with whatever organic material was available. If you were lucky, it's straw. If you were feeling fancy, it's goose feathers. But since you're a pioneer on a budget, it's likely corn husks or shucks. Here is a quirky tidbit. While corn husks were surprisingly resilient and didn't mat down as quickly as straw, they came with a distinct auditory price. Every time you shift your weight, even by an inch, the husks rub against each other with a sound like 1,000 tiny people simultaneously opening bags of potato chips. It is the loudest mattress in human history. Historians still argue whether the transition to these elevated beds was driven by a genuine desire for hygiene, to get away from the damp, insect-ridden earth, or if it was a lingering social status symbol, a desperate attempt to mimic the grand four-posters of the East while living in a room that smells like wet dog and wood smoke. Either way, you are now elevated about 2 feet off the ground, which puts you right in the sweet spot for the drafts coming through the mid-level wall gaps. You lie there, trying to find a position that doesn't involve a knot in the wood, digging into your kidney, and realize that sleep is going to be a very generous term for what's about to happen. There's a common phrase we still use today: sleep tight. Most people think it's just a sweet sentiment, but for you, it's a maintenance requirement. Underneath your mattress tick, you have a network of tightly woven ropes or leather thongs pulled across the frame. Over time, these ropes sag. If you don't sleep tight, that is, use a wooden bed wrench to tighten the ropes until they were as taut as a drum, you'll end up sinking into a miserable V shape in the middle of the night, your knees touching your chin while your back screams for mercy. It's like trying to sleep in a very stiff, very uncomfortable hammock that is also trying to eat you. Your modern chiropractor would likely have a literal stroke just looking at the angle of your neck right now. As you settle in, the sensory experience is, let's call it immersive. The straw or husks inside the tick aren't just rustling, they're also a habitat. You can hear the occasional skittering of a field mouse that has decided your bed is the warmest real estate in the county. It's a bit like having a very small, very furry roommate who doesn't pay rent and occasionally tries to eat your pillow. You've reached a point of exhaustion where you don't even try to shoo them away anymore. You just hope they stay on their side of the mattress. The cold is a physical presence now. It's not just an absence of heat, it feels like a heavy, invisible blanket that has been soaked in ice water and draped over the room. You can feel the temperature difference between the air near the ceiling and the air near the floor. Your bed, situated halfway between the two, is in a constant state of thermal chaos. You try to tuck the edges of the tick around your body to create a seal, but the fabric is coarse and stiff. It's linen or linsey woolsey, a fabric made of linen and wool that manages to be both scratchy and surprisingly unwarm until it's been lived in for a few hours. You think about the luxury of a modern pillow, those ones made of shredded memory, foam, or down. Your pillow is a smaller version of the tick, filled with the same crunchy husks. It doesn't so much cradle your head as it does negotiate with it. You have to punch and knead it into a shape that supports your skull, only for it to slowly deflate and flatten out over the next 20 minutes. It's a constant, low-level physical struggle. You start to wonder if the trees outside are laughing at you. They're standing up in the wind, perfectly happy, while you are lying on their brothers, miserable and cold. Despite the hardness and the noise, there is a strange, primal sense of enclosure. The logs are thick. The roof, though leaky, is overhead. You are in a box you built with your own 2 hands. There is a certain grim satisfaction in that, a feeling that you have carved a tiny, rectangular pocket of not nature out of the vast, unforgiving wilderness. It's a very small victory, but it's yours. You listen to the fire dying down in the hearth, the occasional pop of a coal echoing through the room, and the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of your corn husk mattress. You realize that in this era, sleep isn't a luxury or a form of self care. It's a biological necessity that you have to fight for. Every night is a negotiation with the laws of thermodynamics and the structural integrity of your carpentry. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the draft that is currently investigating your left ear, and focus on the heavy weight of the blanket. You're about to be joined by the rest of the family, which will bring its own set of challenges, but for these few minutes, it's just you and your very loud, very hard, very personal wooden sanctuary. You take a deep breath, the cold air stinging your throat, and wait for the rustling to stop. Just as you're starting to find a precarious balance on your corn husk mountain, the door to the bedroom area, which is really just the other side of the room, opens, and the rest of the household begins to filter in. In the modern world, we treat sleep as a fiercely guarded private act. We have our own rooms, our own white noise machines, and personal space is a concept we defend with the tenacity of a cornered badger. But in your cabin, privacy is a luxury that hasn't been invented yet. It's a 20th century DLC that your current life simply hasn't downloaded. Tonight, you aren't just an individual trying to rest. You are a single layer in a complex, multi-generational human lasagna. Mainstream history often notes that the family bed was the standard for frontier life, but it's hard to visualize the sheer logistical density of it. You aren't just sharing a mattress, you are sharing a microclimate. As your spouse and children climb into the frame, the puncheon logs beneath you groan in protest, shifting under the added weight. The one-poster bed is now supporting several 100 pounds of humanity. There is a very specific hierarchy to the huddle. The children are ushered into the center, tucked between the adults like precious, fidgety cargo. This serves two purposes. First, it keeps them from rolling off the edge of the high bed into the dark void of the floor, and second, it turns them into little biological space heaters. A sleeping toddler in a wool nightshirt radiates an incredible amount of heat, and in a cabin that's currently 38 degrees, that child is essentially a very loud, very small radiator. There is a quirky tidbit of frontier etiquette regarding the bedfellow. In this era, sharing a bed with strangers at an inn or with your entire family at home was so common that there were unspoken rules about it. You didn't just flail around, you practiced spooning. Before it had a cute name, it was simply called sleeping close. You all have to turn at the same time, a synchronized maneuver that requires a level of coordination usually reserved for professional dance troupes or synchronized swimmers. If one person decides they need to shift their weight, the entire quilt sandwich has to recalibrate. It's a collective effort, a communal negotiation with the laws of comfort. Historians still argue whether this lack of privacy led to a more cohesive collectivist society, or if it simply meant that every person in the 19th century was perpetually cranky from being kicked in the ribs by a sibling. Some scholars suggest that the physical proximity of the family unit during the long, dark winters created a psychological bond that modern families, separated by drywall and digital screens, can't quite comprehend. Others point out that it probably just led to a lot of hushed arguments about who was hogging the one decent wool blanket. To you, lying there with a small elbow currently resting on your collarbone, the debate feels less like bonding and more like biological survival. The elderly members of the family, if they're with you, are positioned inside, that is, closest to the log wall. While the wall is cold to the touch, it's also the most stable part of the room. The air near the logs doesn't circulate as much as the air in the center of the cabin, creating a small, stagnant pocket of warmth that has been laboriously generated by the collective breath of the group. You are essentially building a bubble of heat out of your own carbon dioxide. It's not exactly the fresh mountain air the brochures promised, but it beats the alternative. The sensory experience of the family huddle is overwhelming. There's the smell of the linsey-woolsey nightclothes, which haven't been washed since the creek froze over, mixed with the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke and cornmeal. You can hear the rhythm of 4 or 5 different breathing patterns, a chaotic symphony that eventually, miraculously, begins to sync up. There's a strange comfort in it, a heavy, rhythmic pulse that tells you everyone is still there. Everyone is still breathing, and for now, everyone is safe. It's the ultimate life sign. Monitor. In the pitch black of the cabin, you can't see your family, but you can feel the heat of them. A humming, mammalian presence that pushes back against the encroaching silence of the woods. You compare this to modern travel, specifically the middle seat on a long-haul flight. You know that feeling of being squeezed between 2 strangers, trying to keep your limbs from touching theirs, desperately clinging to your 6 inches of armrest? Here you do the opposite. You lean into the contact. Every square inch of skin-to-skin or wool-to-wool contact is a victory against the frost. If there's a gap between you and the person next to you, the cold wind will find it. It will snake its way under the covers like a cold, wet ribbon. So, you huddle. You become a singular, multi-limbed organism designed for the sole purpose of not freezing to death. The quilt is the final layer of this survival strategy. It's likely a heavy, scrapwork quilt, made from every piece of usable fabric the family has owned for the last decade. It's thick, heavy, and smells like a cedar chest. When it's draped over the entire group, it feels like being buried under a pile of warm sand. It's a weight that anchors you to the bed, making it difficult to move even if you wanted to. You are pinned down by the collective weight of your family and your history. And in this moment, that's exactly where you want to be. Of course, the huddle isn't without its drawbacks. One of the children starts a cough, a dry, rasping sound that echoes in the small space. You feel the tension ripple through the bed. In the 1800s, a cough isn't just a nuisance, it's a threat. You listen closely, waiting to see if it continues, if it sounds like the croup or something worse. The silence that follows is thick with unspoken anxiety. You realize that your proximity to each other is your greatest strength and your greatest vulnerability. You share your heat, but you also share your germs, your dreams, and your fears. As the night deepens, the fire in the hearth begins to fade, and the room temperature drops another few degrees. You feel the person next to you shiver, and instinctively you pull them closer. It's an automatic response, a primal reflex that predates language. You are a pack animal, and the pack is currently keeping the winter at bay. The wind screams outside, rattling the shingles and trying to find a way through the mud-sealed cracks. But inside the human lasagna, it's almost, dare you say it, warm. You find a rhythm in the collective breathing, a slow, heavy cadence that masks the sound of the storm. You aren't just sleeping. You are participating in a nightly ritual of endurance. You close your eyes, the weight of the quilt pressing you into the corn husks, and for the first time tonight, you feel like you might actually make it to morning. As the family huddle stabilizes and the shared body heat begins to push back against the biting chill, you realize that the thin wool blankets you brought from the east are about as effective as trying to stop a waterfall with a lace doily. To truly survive a frontier winter night, you have to look toward the original inhabitants of the woods. You reach out and pull the final, heaviest layer over the entire group. A massive, thick bearskin. In a modern high-end boutique, a real fur throw might cost more than your first car and be marketed as the pinnacle of luxury. But here, this isn't a fashion statement or a decorative accent for a rustic cabin aesthetic. This is a heavy-duty, biological armor. And let's be honest, it smells exactly like what it is. A large, dead animal that has been repurposed as a roof for your bed. A mainstream historical fact you'll often find in settler diaries is that until sheep farming became widespread on the frontier, wool was an incredibly precious and scarce commodity. You couldn't just hop onto a website and order a king-size merino wool comforter. Most pioneers relied heavily on furs and peltry, trading with local hunters or indigenous groups for the hides of buffalo, elk, or bears. These skins are remarkably efficient at trapping heat, but they come with a sensory price tag that would make a modern person gag. The bear skin you're currently under hasn't been professionally cleaned. It was cured using traditional, albeit pungent, methods. Here is a quirky tidbit that usually gets left out of the Little House on the Prairie version of history. Many hides were cured using a mixture of the animal's own brains and, occasionally, fermented urine. This was the frontier's version of industrial chemistry. The fats in the brain helped to soften the leather, but they didn't exactly leave it smelling like lavender and sea salt. As the warmth from your collective bodies begins to heat the underside of the skin, the aroma starts to wake up. It's a deep, musky, oily scent that is somehow both primal and slightly nauseating. It's like sleeping inside a giant ancient leather boot that has been soaked in beef broth and left in a damp basement. You've reached the point where you have to decide if you'd rather breathe through your nose and be warm or breathe through your mouth and potentially inhale a stray hair from a creature that died in 1824. There is an ongoing scholarly debate among cultural historians regarding the pioneer aesthetic. Some argue that settlers adopted these heavy furs purely out of grim necessity, viewing them as a savage but required substitution for civilized fabric. Others suggest that the adoption of these furs represented a deeper cultural blending, where European settlers were actively mimicking the superior survival technologies of indigenous tribes, recognizing that a bear skin was simply better technology for a Minnesota winter than a French duvet. To you, the debate is entirely irrelevant. You aren't thinking about cultural synthesis, you're thinking about the fact that this bear skin is so stiff it feels like you're being tucked in by a very large, very hairy piece of plywood. When the temperature drops below a certain point, the natural oils in the fur begin to harden, making the skin less of a blanket and more of a shield. If you try to bend the edge of the hide to tuck it under your chin, it resists with a stubborn, leathery creak. It's not soft. It's not fluffy. It's a coarse, bristly experience that exfoliates your face every time you move. You compare this to the modern weighted blanket craze. People today pay hundreds of dollars for a blanket filled with glass beads to help with their anxiety. You have the 19th century version, a 70-pound bear hide that provides calming pressure by literally pinning you to the mattress so you can't escape. It's not so much reducing anxiety as it is physically preventing movement. If you had a nightmare and tried to bolt upright, you'd probably just give yourself a neck injury against the underside of the bear. The fur also has a life of its own in the dark. Because it hasn't been treated with modern pesticides, it's a bit of a portable ecosystem. You can feel the occasional tickle. That isn't just a stray hair. Historians estimate that the average pioneer bed was home to a variety of hitchhikers, bedbugs, lice, and the occasional flea. It's a constant, low-level, itchy reality. You've learned to distinguish between a dangerous itch, something that might be a biting insect, and a passive itch caused by the coarse wool and stiff fur. You've developed a specialized frontier skill, the no-hand scratch, where you rub your shoulder against the person next to you or wiggle your hips against the corn husks to find relief without letting the precious warm air escape from under the covers. As the fire in the hearth flickers, the light catches the tips of the fur, making it look like the animal is still breathing. It's a bit macabre, but on the frontier, you lose your squeamishness pretty quickly. This bear probably tried to eat your corn crop 3 months ago. Now, it's the only thing keeping your toes from turning into ice cubes. There's a certain poetic justice in that, or at least a very practical form of recycling. You think about how strange it is that in the future, people will have faux fur, made of plastic and petroleum, designed to look like this, but without any of the weight, the smell, or the history. They'll want the look of the wilderness without the wet dog olfactory experience. They're missing out on the full 4D immersive experience of the stiff embrace. You find yourself staring into the dark, your nose inches away from the leathery underside of the hide. You can feel the weight of it on your chest, a heavy, reassuring pressure that mimics the feeling of being underground. It's a sensory deprivation chamber. The thick hide muffles the sound of the wind, turning the sharp screams of the storm into a low, distant hum. For the first time all night, the cabin feels truly quiet. The smell, which was so offensive 20 minutes ago, has become a familiar, grounding presence. It's the smell of still alive. You realize that your relationship with the natural world has completely shifted. Back east, nature was something you looked at through a window or walked through on a Sunday afternoon. Here, nature is literally on top of you. It's in your lungs, it's against your skin, and it's the only reason you're going to see the sunrise. You take a slow, shallow breath, letting the musky scent of the bare skin settle into your senses. The stiffness of the leather doesn't feel like a burden anymore. It feels like a promise. It's a promise that the cold can stay out there in the trees, while you and your family remain tucked away in this hairy, smelly, beautiful fortress of heat. You close your eyes, the weight of the bare skin anchoring you to the earth, and let the rhythmic rustle of the corn husks lull you into the first real moment of peace you've had all day. Despite the 70 pounds of bear fur and the collective metabolic output of your entire family, there is one part of your body that remains stubbornly, almost aggressively frozen: your feet. In the 19th century, your extremities are the first casualties of the Winter War. Your toes feel like 10 small, individual icicles that have been grafted onto your feet as a cruel joke. To combat this, you have to employ the pioneer's tactical heater, which is really just a polite way of saying you're going to bring a piece of the fireplace into bed with you. You reach down toward the foot of the bed and carefully adjust the heavy, cloth-wrapped object that has been waiting for you. It's a stone, a common gray river rock that you pulled from the embers of the hearth just before climbing in. A mainstream historical fact you'll find in almost any colonial or frontier museum is the prevalence of bed warmers. The wealthy back east had beautiful brass pans with long handles that they filled with hot coals and slid between the sheets to preheat the bed. You, however, do not have a brass pan, and you certainly don't have sheets in the way a modern person understands them. Your bed warmer is a soapstone or a standard brick. Soapstone was the gold standard of frontier heating because of its incredible thermal mass. It can hold heat for hours, slowly releasing it like a low-frequency radio signal of warmth. If you are really struggling, you might just use a regular brick, though bricks have a tendency to crumble or sweat moisture if they weren't fired properly. This is where the strategy comes in. You can't just toss a glowing hot rock into a bed filled with dry corn husks and straw. That is a very efficient way to turn your cabin into a bonfire. You have to wrap the stone in several layers of old flannel or wool rags. It's a delicate balance. Too few layers, and you'll wake up with a blister the size of a silver dollar on your heel. A pioneer pedicure that nobody wants. Too many layers, and the heat won't reach your feet until 3 in the morning, which is about 4 hours too late to be useful. You have to find that Goldilocks zone of insulation. It's essentially the 1800s version of a heated blanket, but instead of a low, medium, high switch, your only control setting is how many old socks can I wrap around this spicy rock. Here is a quirky tidbit of frontier life. Some families actually had assigned stones. In larger households, children would scratch their initials into a specific brick or stone to ensure they didn't get stuck with the runt of the hearth. The small, pathetic pebble that lost its heat in 20 minutes. There are even accounts of travelers carrying their own personal traveling stones in their coat pockets during the day, then using them in bed at night. It's a level of emotional attachment to a piece of mineral that most modern people only reserve for their smartphones. Your stone is your battery, and your feet are at 1%. There is an ongoing scholarly debate among historians of domestic technology regarding the impact of these localized heat sources on the evolution of the American home. Some argue that the reliance on stones and bricks actually delayed the widespread adoption of cast iron wood stoves, as families felt warm enough with their localized heaters and were reluctant to invest in the expensive, heavy technology of a stove. Others suggest that the stone in bed method was so inefficient that it actually drove the desperate innovation toward central heating. To you, lying there trying to nudge the rock with your big toe, this debate feels like a luxury for people who aren't currently worried about their pinky toe falling off like a dry twig. The sensation of the heated stone is unique. It's a dry heat that feels like it's trying to penetrate all the way to your marrow. When your frozen feet first make contact with the warm flannel wrapping, there's a moment of intense, almost painful stinging. The thaw. It's like 1,000 tiny needles are waking up under your skin. You compare this to the modern luxury of heated car seats. You know that feeling when you're leaving work on a Tuesday in February and the seat starts to hum with warmth, making you feel like a human panini? This is that, but with a much higher risk of actual combustion. It's the organic version of a Tesla feature powered by wood ash and geological endurance, but the stone is a fickle companion. As you drift towards sleep, the stone begins to migrate, because the mattress is a chaotic landscape of corn husks. The stone doesn't stay where you put it. You'll be mid-dream, perhaps dreaming about a world where houses are made of something other than trees, when you'll suddenly feel a searing heat against your calf. The stone has rolled. You have to perform a blind kick under the heavy bear skin, trying to relocate the heater without letting any cold air into the huddle. It's a game of hot potato played entirely with your feet, and the stakes are your own skin. There's also the smell of scorched wool. If the stone was a little too hot when you wrapped it, the lanolin and fibers in the rags begin to give off a faint, singed aroma. It's a very specific scent, somewhere between abandoned campfire and wet sheep. To a modern nose, it's a warning sign of an impending fire. To you, it's the smell of success. It means the stone is working. It's the frontier equivalent of that new electronics smell you get when you unbox a fresh laptop. It's the scent of technology performing its duty. You realize that your entire existence has become a series of thermal negotiations. You are trading your wood supply for fire, your fire for stone heat, and your stone heat for the ability to keep your toes. It's a complex energy economy. You think about the people back in the cities, sleeping in brick houses with coal furnaces, and they seem like a different species. They probably don't even know the proper way to wrap a soapstone. They've lost the tactile wisdom of the rock. The weight of the stone is also strangely comforting. Having a 3-pound mineral sitting on your feet acts as an anchor. In a house that feels like it might blow away in the next gust of wind, having something solid and heavy and warm is a psychological tether. You press your soles against the fabric-covered warmth, feeling the heat slowly win the battle against the icy drafts. The shivering in your legs finally starts to subside. You aren't warm by any modern definition. The tip of your nose is still cold enough to shatter, but your core and your extremities have reached a truce. You close your eyes, the dry scent of scorched wool in your nostrils, and let the heavy, geological warmth of the earth pull you down into a deeper layer of rest. The spicy rock has done its job. As you settle into the rhythm of the stone heat and the family huddle, a new sensory challenge emerges that no amount of bearskin can fully mask. It's the air itself. In your modern life, you likely obsess over air quality. You might have a HEPA filter humming in the corner or a Nest Protect sensor that alerts your phone if a single piece of toast gets too enthusiastic in the toaster. But in this log cabin, the air is a thick, visible, and highly aromatic soup. You are currently experiencing the pioneer chimney effect. Because the hearth is an open, rudimentary structure and the cabin is sealed as tightly as mud and moss can manage, the smoke doesn't always go where it's told. Mainstream history often romanticizes the smoke from the chimney as a sign of a welcoming home, but inside, it's a respiratory battlefield. Your chimney, built with more hope than engineering, is prone to backdrafting. When a particularly strong gust of wind hits the roof, it pushes the smoke back down the flue and into the room. Within seconds, the cabin is filled with a low-hanging blue-gray haze. It's not just wood smoke, it's a cocktail of fine ash, soot, and the vaporized oils of everything you cooked for dinner. You find yourself lying there, eyes stinging and throat prickling, trying to decide if the warmth of the fire is worth the gradual soot plating of your lungs. There is a quirky tidbit about pioneer eyes. Settler journals often mention the red eye, a chronic condition where the smoke and the dust from the corn husk mattresses kept people's eyes in a state of constant mild inflammation. You've learned to sleep with your head partially tucked under the quilt, creating a makeshift air filtration system out of several layers of itchy wool. It's a bit like breathing through an old sweater that someone left in a campfire. It's not fresh, but it's better than the alternative. You compare this to modern forest fire season or urban smog alerts. You know that feeling when you walk outside and the air smells like a barbecue gone wrong? That's just Tuesday in 1820. Historians still argue whether the high rates of respiratory issues among frontier families were primarily due to the smoke from these inefficient hearths or the sheer amount of organic dust kicked up by the straw and husk bedding. Some scholars suggest that the smoke-filled room was actually a subconscious choice. The smoke acted as a natural fumigant, keeping down the population of mosquitoes and flies during the warmer months and perhaps even acting as a crude preservative for the timber. To you, this sounds like a very generous way of saying we were accidentally smoking ourselves like hams because we didn't know how to build a proper flue. The dust is the smoke's silent partner in crime. Every time the person next to you shifts their weight, a fresh cloud of fine particles from the corn husks and the dried moss chinking erupts into the air. In the dim light of the dying fire, you can see these particles dancing in the air like tiny, malevolent ghosts. You realize that your house is basically a giant wooden snow globe, but instead of pretty white flakes, it's filled with pulverized river clay and dried grass. It settles on everything, your blankets, your skin, and even the water bucket sitting by the door. You reach a point of desperation where you have to do the unthinkable. You have to open the door. It feels like a betrayal of everything you've worked for tonight. You spent hours sealing the cracks, you've built a human huddle for warmth, and now you have to let the enemy in. You climb out from under the heavy bear skin, the cold air hitting your body like a physical blow, and crack the heavy wooden door just an inch or two. The exchange is immediate. A thin, violent stream of sub-zero air cuts through the smoky haze, creating a swirling vortex of vapor. The contrast is staggering. The air outside is so cold it feels clean, almost sterile. It smells of frozen pine and nothingness. For a few seconds, you just stand there, taking shallow breaths of the icy air, letting it clear the stinging from your eyes. You feel like a diver surfacing for air, but you can't leave it open for long. You can practically hear the heat you've spent 3 hours accumulating escaping through the gap, screaming free at last as it disappears into the forest. You shut the door and drop the heavy wooden latch back into place, the sound echoing through the cabin like a gunshot. Back in the bed, the smoke and dust cycle begins to settle. The fresh air you let in has helped, but it also brought the temperature down significantly. You're back to the shiver and huddle phase. You think about the modern luxury of a ventilation system. You know, those silent fans in bathroom ceilings or the HRV systems in new houses that exchange stale air for fresh? They are absolute miracles of human ingenuity. In your world, ventilation is a manual process that involves risking a frostbitten nose just to stop coughing. There's a strange psychological effect to the smoke. It creates a sense of enclosure that is almost claustrophobic. You can't see the walls of your own home anymore. Your world has shrunk to the 3-foot radius around the bed. You are living in a tiny, hazy bubble. It makes the passage of time feel even slower. You start to wonder if the sun will ever actually rise, or if you've been transported to some dim, gray purgatory where the only currency is breathable oxygen. As you drift back toward a state of semi-consciousness, you find yourself focusing on the texture of the air. It feels heavy and sticky. You can taste the wood smoke on the back of your tongue, a bitter, resinous flavor that you know you'll still be tasting during breakfast. You realize that clean is a relative term. In the future, people will worry about volatile organic compounds and particulate matter. 2.5. In your world, if the air doesn't make you actively pass out, it's considered good air. You pull the quilt back over your face, creating your little wool-filtered sanctuary once again. The rhythmic breathing of your family members has a slightly wheezy quality to it tonight, a subtle reminder of the toll the cabin takes on the body. But for now, the stinging has subsided to a dull ache, and the smoke has thinned enough to be ignored. You close your eyes, the scent of charred oak and river mud filling your senses, and try to find that thin line between suffocating and resting. It's a narrow path, but you've walked it before. You let the heaviness of the air pull you down, further into the dark, hoping that by the time you wake up, the wind will have shifted and the chimney will finally start doing its one job. The air in the cabin has finally cleared of the most aggressive smoke, but a new sensory layer is about to be added to your evening. On the most brutal nights, the kind where the wind sounds like a freight train and the temperature drops so low the trees outside actually explode, the Pioneer cabin undergoes a transformation. You hear a heavy thud at the door, followed by a series of rhythmic, shuffling footsteps on the puncheon floor. You aren't being robbed by a very polite thief. You are being joined by Bessie. In a world where livestock is your most valuable asset, leaving a cow or a few priced chickens out in a pole barn during a true blue norther storm is essentially throwing money into a snowbank. So, you bring them inside. Mainstream history often glosses over the barnhouse reality of the frontier, preferring to keep the animals and the humans in their respective neat little boxes. But for you, the boundary between the barn and the bedroom is porous. Having an 800-pound cow standing in the corner of your studio apartment adds a whole new dimension to the term living space. Livestock are, quite literally, massive biological furnaces. A cow produces an incredible amount of metabolic heat, somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 BTUs per hour just by existing. In a room that is currently a thermal disaster zone, that cow is the most powerful space heater you own. There's a quirky tidbit often found in the memoirs of overland travelers. The smell of a cow in a small house is described as reassuringly thick. It's a mix of fermented grass, old hay, and the general musk of a large, damp mammal. To a modern person who thinks nature is a scented candle from a mall, this would be an olfactory emergency. To you, it's the scent of a surviving investment. You lie there in the dark, and instead of the silence of the woods, you hear the rhythmic munch 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 of Bessie chewing her cud. It's a slow, grinding sound, like a very large, very bored person eating a never-ending salad. It's strangely hypnotic, a biological metronome that measures the passage of the midnight hours. Historians still argue whether the practice of bringing livestock indoors, common in European longhouses for centuries, was a widespread deliberate choice on the American frontier or a desperate last-minute measure used only during record-breaking storms. Some argue that the frontier cabin was a step backward in hygiene but a step forward in thermal efficiency. Others point out that keeping animals inside likely contributed to the frontier fever, often actually typhus or other zoonotic diseases that decimated entire settlements. For you, the debate is settled by the fact that your toes are finally starting to feel like they belong to a living human being thanks to the ambient temperature rise Bessie has provided. The sensory experience of sharing your bedroom with a cow is busy. Cows are not quiet sleepers. They sigh. They shift their weight, making the floorboards groan in a way that makes you wonder about the structural integrity of your foundation. They occasionally let out a low, vibrating hum that you can feel through the frame of your bed. You compare this to a modern white noise machine. People today pay for apps that play brown noise or heavy rain to mask the sound of city traffic. You have bovine noise, a deep, organic thrumming that masks the sound of the wind. It's a 400 Hz frequency directly from the source. But then there are the chickens. If the cow is a space heater, the chickens are small, feathered alarm clocks with no snooze function. They've been tucked into a crate or a corner, but they are incredibly sensitive to the light of the hearth. Every time a log shifts and a flame flares up, a rooster might decide it's 6 a.m. in July rather than 2 a.m. in January. The sudden, piercing cock-a-doodle-doo inside a 15-foot room is enough to take 10 years off your life. You lie there, heart hammering against your ribs, swearing at a bird that has the brain the size of a bean but the volume of a jet engine. The presence of the animals also changes the social dynamic of the room. You find yourself talking to the cow. "Move over, Bessie," you whisper into the dark when her tail thumps against the bedpost. There's a strange, cross-species camaraderie that develops when you're both hiding from the same blizzard. You are both just bundles of carbon and warmth trying to make it to the next blade of grass or the next bowl of cornmeal. It's a very grounding feeling. You aren't just a pioneer anymore. You are a member of a multi-species survival collective. Of course, the livestock also bring their own emissions. We've already discussed the smoke and the dust, but now you have the added element of barnyard dampness. The cow's breath is a constant stream of warm, moist air. In the cold cabin, this moisture hits the walls and the blankets, contributing to the general feeling of being slightly soggy. It's like sleeping in a greenhouse that's also a stable. You reach a point of sensory saturation where you simply stop processing the smells and sounds. Your brain moves them into the background noise category, right alongside the whistling wind and the crackling fire. You think about how sanitized the modern world has become. In the future, people will buy organic, grass-fed beef from a refrigerated case, never having smelled the animal it came from or felt the heat of its breath on a freezing night. They'll have nature documentaries on high-definition screens, but they'll never know the peculiar comfort of an 800-pound animal protecting them from a storm. They have the product, you have the relationship. It's a messy, loud, and smelly relationship, but it's an honest one. As the night reaches its deepest point, you feel a strange sense of security. With the family huddled together, the bearskin pinned down, the stone heating your feet, and Bessie standing guard in the corner, the cabin feels like a fortress. The wind can scream all it wants. It can't get past the cow. You find yourself drifting off to the sound of that slow, rhythmic chewing. It's the sound of life continuing, of digestion happening, of a biological machine turning hay into heat. You close your eyes, the musky scent of the barn filling your senses, and let the heavy thrum of the bovine heater lull you into a deep, dreamless sleep. As you descend into the heavier layers of sleep, your brain doesn't truly switch off. Instead, it enters a state of high alert resting. In the modern world, we strive for dead sleep, that blissful, uninterrupted void where even a car alarm or a neighbor's party can't reach us. But in the 1800s, especially in a log cabin during a winter storm, dead sleep is a dangerous luxury. You are currently experiencing the gunshot sound of frozen timber. As the temperature outside plunges toward 30 below, the moisture deep within the fibers of your greenwood logs begins to freeze. When water turns to ice, it expands with a force that can split boulders. And inside your walls, this expansion manifests as a series of sudden, violent reports. Crack! The sound rips through the silence of the cabin like a pistol shot fired inches from your ear. You bolt upright, or at least you try to, before the 70-pound bearskin reminds you of its authority. Your heart is thudding against your ribs, a frantic rhythm that matches the whistling wind. To a modern person, that sound would mean a structural failure or an intruder. To you, it's just the house talking. Mainstream history books often mention the sounds of the frontier, but they rarely capture the sheer, heart-stopping volume of a frozen log splitting. It's the sound of a living thing being torn apart by the cold. There is a quirky tidbit of frontier lore regarding these sounds. Some settlers believed that if the log cracks happened in a specific sequence, starting from the bottom and moving up, it meant the frost was climbing the house, and the worst of the storm was still to come. You've learned to become a connoisseur of these noises. You lie there, ears straining, performing a mental diagnostic of your shelter. That last crack came from the west wall, near the base. It's a good crack. It means the wood is seasoning, adjusting to the pressure. What you're really listening for is the groan. The groan is different. It's a low, sustained creak that comes from the plates, the heavy logs that support the roof. If the snow on the roof is too heavy and the timber is too stressed, the groan tells you that the structural integrity of your ceiling is currently a matter of opinion rather than fact. Historians still argue whether the specific pitch roof design of American cabins was a direct evolution to shed the massive snow loads of the Appalachian and Midwestern winters, or if it was just a continuation of European styles that happened to work. Whatever the origin, you are currently the one living under several tons of frozen water, held up by trees you chopped down while you were thinking about what to have for lunch. The sensory environment of the cabin at 3:20 a.m. is a chaotic landscape of acoustics. There is the high-pitched scree of the wind as it tries to force its way through the chimney flue, sounding like a chorus of ghosts. There is the rhythmic thump-thump of the cow's tail in the corner. And then there is the whistle. You realized earlier that you plugged most of the gaps, but the cold has a way of finding the ones you missed. As the logs shrink and expand, new, microscopic fissures open up, creating a series of tiny, icy flutes. The house is literally playing a dissonant, frozen symphony. You compare this to modern house noises. You know that feeling when you're lying in bed in your suburban home and you hear the water heater kick on or the floorboards creak as the HVAC system changes the temperature? You might roll over and think, I should probably call a plumber next week. Here, the noises are a real-time status report on your survival. You have to be able to distinguish between the harmless sound of a freezing log and the emergency sound of a roof beam giving way. It's a vigilant sleep, a state of being 20% awake at all times. Your modern self would be diagnosed with a chronic anxiety disorder. Your pioneer self just calls this Tuesday. There's a strange psychological weight to the darkness that accompanies these sounds. Because you're saving your precious tallow, rendered animal fat, or lamp oil, there are no lights. The only illumination is the dying, dull red pulse of the embers in the hearth, which barely reaches the edge of the bed. This total dark makes the sounds feel larger, more physical. When a log cracks, you don't just hear it. You feel the vibration in the puncheon boards beneath your mattress. It's as if the house is a giant drum and the winter is the drummer. In this state of hyper-awareness, you notice the ghostly touches. Sometimes a draft is so cold and focused that it feels like a physical hand brushing against your cheek. In the 19th century, folklore was filled with stories of Old Man Winter or the Frost King literally reaching into homes to claim the unwary. Even if you don't believe in spirits, the physical reality of the sub-zero air makes it hard not to anthropomorphize the storm. It feels like an entity with a will, a predator circling your small wooden box looking for a way in. You find yourself practicing a form of mental spatial mapping. You visualize the cabin in your mind, the weight of the snow on the north slope, the depth of the foundation stones, the thickness of the door latch. You are mentally reinforcing the walls as if your focused attention could somehow add structural support to the timber. It's an exhausting way to rest, but it's the only way you know how to stay in control of a situation that is fundamentally out of your hands. Then, for a moment, the wind dies down. The silence that follows is even more unnerving than the noise. It's a heavy, pressurized quiet that makes your ears ring. You wait for the next crack, the next sign that the house is still holding its own against the pressure. When it finally comes, a sharp, splintering sound from the loft area, you actually feel a sense of relief. The house is still talking. The logs are still fighting. You realize that your relationship with quiet has changed. In the future, people will seek out quiet as a form of therapy. They'll go to sensory deprivation tanks or buy expensive noise-canceling headphones to escape the din of the world. But for you, total silence is the sound of the world ending. Silence means the fire has gone out, the wind has stopped, or the house has finally given up. You embrace the cracks and the whistles. They are the sound of the struggle. You close your eyes again, your ears still tuned to the frequency of the timber, and let the violent gunshot sounds of the freezing wood act as your lullaby. The house is still standing, and for tonight, that is enough of a miracle to sleep on. The gunshot crack of the timber has done its job. You are no longer in the deep, heavy sleep of the exhausted. You have drifted into the Pioneer's Plateau, a state of semi-consciousness that is remarkably similar to the way a modern person feels when they're trying to nap on a crowded bus while clutching their luggage. You are resting, but you are also monitoring. Your brain has developed a background process, a 19th century system update that constantly checks two vital data points, the temperature of the room and the status of the hearth. You realize with a sense of weary resignation that the air on the tip of your nose has transitioned from uncomfortably cold to actively hostile. The fire is dying. It's time for the midnight maintenance ritual, the 90-minute semi-conscious nap cycle that defines the winter experience. Mainstream history often discusses the concept of segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. Before the invention of the light bulb and the subsequent industrial war on our circadian rhythms, humans didn't typically sleep in one solid 8-hour block. People would have a first sleep beginning shortly after dusk, wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night to pray, converse, or check the livestock, and then fall into a second sleep until dawn. For you, this isn't a quaint cultural tradition, it's a thermal necessity. If you sleep through the night, you wake up in a refrigerator. You have to be your own thermostat. Your internal alarm clock isn't set for a specific time. It's triggered by the specific hollow clink of a log falling into ash. You perform the most difficult physical maneuver of the 1800s. You leave the huddle, moving out from under the 70-pound bearskin, and the collective warmth of your family feels like stepping out of a warm bath and directly into a walk-in freezer. The air in the cabin is now so cold that it feels thick, like you're swimming through invisible icy water. You compare this to the modern smart home experience. In the 21st century, if the temperature drops, a silent signal travels to a furnace, a fan whirs, and you never even have to open your eyes. Your user interface tonight consists of a pair of freezing floorboards and a heavy iron poker. It's a very manual way to live, and frankly, the customer service in the frontier is terrible. You shuffle across the puncheon floor, your feet immediately finding the icy grit of the dried mud that fell from the walls earlier. Every step is a test of your willpower. You reach the hearth, and in the dim, pulsing red light of the embers, you see the backlog has finally given up the ghost. There's a quirky tidbit of frontier fire lore regarding banking the fire, to ensure you don't have to start from scratch, which involves a flint, a steel, and a lot of swearing in the dark. You bank the coals by burying them deep under a layer of their own ash. This insulates the embers, keeping them alive like a glowing underground secret. If you do it right, the fire stays in sleep mode, ready to be rebooted with a few breaths and some kindling. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep pattern was a biological norm that we've lost to modernity, or if it was strictly an environmental adaptation to the realities of a wood-burning world. Some scholars suggest that the midnight watch was a vital part of human social evolution, a time for deep reflection and communal bonding. To you, standing over a pile of gray ash at 3:15 a.m., it feels less like deep reflection and more like, I really wish I had invented central heating 300 years early. You feel like you're working a graveyard shift in a factory where the only product is not dying. You reach for the next heavy log. This is your gym membership for the night. Lifting a 20-pound piece of oak while half asleep and shivering is a full-body workout that no boutique fitness studio could ever replicate. You carefully position the log, trying not to kick up too much ash, because as we've established, your lungs are already about 40% soot at this point. You blow gently on the banked embers. The glow intensifies from a dull, bruised purple to a bright, defiant orange. A few small tongues of flame begin to lick at the dry bark. The system is back online. The sensory experience of the midnight fire watch is strangely beautiful if you can ignore the frost on your eyelashes. The cabin looks different in this light. The shadows of the hanging herbs and tools are softer, less jagged. The rhythmic breathing of your family and the occasional huff from Bessie in the corner create a soundscape that is deeply grounding. You are the keeper of the flame, the solitary guardian of the family's warmth. There's a heavy, primitive responsibility in it that makes you feel connected to every human who has ever sat by a fire in a dark forest, going back 10,000 years. It's a very long, very cold lineage. You stand there for a moment, letting the radiation from the new flames hit your shins. It's a focused, intense heat that feels like it's trying to melt the bone. You realize that your life is measured in burn times. You don't think in hours, you think in half logs or quarter stacks. You have about 90 minutes before this new wood settles into a bed of coals and the temperature starts to dip again. That's your window for your second sleep. It's a precarious way to rest, a series of 90-minute sprints toward morning. As you prepare to return to the bed, you notice the silence of the storm outside has taken on a different quality. The wind isn't screaming anymore. It's panting. The worst of the pressure seems to have passed, though the cold remains. You crawl back under the bear skin, feeling the immediate, wonderful shock of the heat pocket your family has maintained in your absence. You slide your feet back toward the soapstone, which is now only lukewarm, but still better than the floor. Your second sleep is usually deeper than the first. The fire is high, the house is settled, and the biological maintenance has been performed. You find yourself drifting off into a dream where the walls are made of something called drywall, and the heat comes from a magical white box on the wall that never needs to be fed. It's a ridiculous, futuristic fantasy. You settle your head back onto the crunchy cornhusk pillow, the scent of fresh wood smoke and toasted oak filling your senses. You have successfully negotiated another 90 minutes of life. You close your eyes, the orange glow of the hearth dancing behind your eyelids, and let the rhythmic munching of the cow lead you back into the dark. Morning is still a world away, but the fire is bright, and for now, the frontier is held at bay. You lie there, tucked back into the relative safety of the huddle, watching the new flames from your midnight fire watch slowly subside into a steady, rhythmic pulse. As you close your eyes and then open them again, you realize that you are experiencing something that has become almost entirely extinct in the 21st century. Total, unadulterated darkness. In your modern life, darkness is a myth. Even in the middle of the night, there is the blue standby light of a television, the ghostly green glow of a microwave clock, or the persistent, invasive hum of a street lamp bleeding through the curtains. But here, in the heart of the frontier winter, the dark isn't just an absence of light, it's a physical weight. It feels like a thick velvet shroud has been laid over your face, pressing into your eye sockets with the pressure of 1,000 fathoms of ocean. Mainstream history often notes that the 19th century was a light-starved era, where the cost of illumination was a significant portion of a household's budget. You don't just flip a switch. If you want light, you have to pay for it in animal fat or expensive whale oil. Tallow candles, made from rendered beef or mutton fat, were the standard, but they were precious. You didn't leave them burning just to feel cozy. You used them to find the door or read the Bible for 10 minutes before the wick drowned in a pool of stinking grease. Tonight, however, you aren't even using a candle. You are relying on the void. You compare this to your modern dark mode settings on your smartphone. You know how you switch your apps to a black background to save your eyes from the blue light strain? This is the ultimate dark mode, but there's no screen to look at, and the battery life is your own sanity. There is a quirky, somewhat grimy tidbit about frontier lighting: the slut lamp. Despite its unfortunate modern name, a slut lamp was a humble, functional object, usually a shallow iron dish filled with rancid kitchen grease or fish oil, with a twisted rag acting as a wick. It produced a dim, smoky, flickering light that smelled like a fry cook's apron and gave off more soot than illumination. You opted not to light yours tonight because the smell of burning hog fat combined with the cow's breath and the wood smoke was starting to make the cabin feel like a very poorly ventilated barbecue pit. So, you chose a darkness instead. Historians still argue whether the absolute dark of the frontier was a primary driver in the development of American folklore and the specific brand of frontier Gothic storytelling. Some scholars suggest that being trapped in a 15-foot box for 14 hours of darkness every night forced the human brain into a state of sensory deprivation-induced pareidolia. A fancy way of saying your brain starts seeing ghosts in the shadows and hearing voices in the wind just to keep itself entertained. Others argue that it actually led to a much higher level of internalized meditation and a different perception of time altogether. To you, it just feels like the world has stopped existing outside the edges of your bare skin. The sensory experience of this darkness is transformative. When you can't see, your other senses don't just sharpen, they become hypersensitive, almost paranoid. You can hear the heartbeat of the cabin. You hear the slow, rhythmic expansion of the logs, the settling of the foundation stones, and the tiny, frantic scratching of a beetle somewhere inside the west wall. You can smell the different layers of the room, the sharp, metallic scent of the frost on the door latch, the deep, earthy musk of the floor, and the sweet, lingering aroma of the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Without sight, your world is no longer three-dimensional. It's a swirling, olfactory, and auditory map. You think about your modern phone again, that glowing rectangle of light that usually accompanies you to bed. In the 21st century, the darkness is the time when you scroll through the infinite void of the internet, looking at pictures of people you don't know and reading news that makes you anxious. Here, the infinite void is literal. There is no feed to refresh. The only update you get is the sound of the wind or the shifting of the cow. It's a profound isolation that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has never been more than 5 feet away from a light switch. It makes you feel incredibly small, a tiny flickering spark of consciousness in a vast black universe. There's a strange phenomenon that happens in this level of darkness, the visual snow. If you stare into the blackness long enough, your optic nerves start to misfire, creating tiny, dancing sparks of light and geometric patterns that aren't really there. It's as if your eyes are trying to invent light because they can't believe it's actually gone. You find yourself closing your eyes just to escape the fake light your brain is creating. But then the darkness feels even heavier. It's a psychological tug of war. You realize that seeing is a habit you can't quite break, even when there's nothing to see. You also realize how much your modern sense of time is tied to light. In your cabin, 9 o'clock doesn't exist. There is only the long dark. You lose track of whether you've been awake for 10 minutes or 2 hours. The night stretches out, expanding to fill the space available. It's a slow, molasses-thick passage of time. You find yourself counting breaths or listening to the rhythmic chewing of the cow just to have a clock to follow. It's a meditative state that borders on the hallucinatory. You start to understand why the pioneers were so obsessed with the rising sun. It wasn't just about the warmth, it was about the return of the world. The darkness also changes your relationship with the people around you. In the light, you see your family as individuals with faces and expressions. In the total dark, they are just warmths. They are anchors of heat and sound in the void. You reach out a hand, careful not to let the cold in, and feel the rough wool of a sleeve or the steady rise and fall of a shoulder. It's a purely tactile connection. It's a very ancient way of being human, a return to the nest where sight is secondary to the feeling of the pack. As the hours of the long dark crawl by, you start to feel a strange, paradoxical sense of freedom. In the light, there are chores to do, wood to chop, walls to fix. In the total dark, you are off the hook. You couldn't do anything even if you wanted to. The darkness is a forced ceasefire in your war with nature. It's a mandatory period of non-existence. You find yourself leaning into it, letting the weight of the blackness push you down deeper into the corn husks. You aren't just a person in a cabin, you are a part of the night itself. You listen to the wind, which has finally settled into a low, mournful hum. The gunshot cracks of the timber have slowed down as the cabin reaches thermal equilibrium with the sub-zero air. The world is silent, dark, and still. You think about the future again, about a world where the night is defeated by LED bulbs and neon signs, and you feel a strange surge of pity for them. They'll never know this silence. They'll never know the peculiar, terrifying beauty of a world that is truly, completely, and honestly dark. You take a slow, deep breath, the cold air filling your lungs, and let the heavy void carry you back towards the edges of sleep. The sun is still hours away, and for once, you aren't in any hurry for it to arrive. As you lie in the absolute darkness, waiting for the first gray hint of dawn to bleed through the cracks in the shutters, you become acutely aware of your own outfit. In the modern world, we have sleepwear. Thin, breathable cotton pajamas, perhaps a silk eye mask, and if we're feeling particularly adventurous, maybe some moisture-wicking tech fabric that promises to regulate our temperature to within a fraction of a degree. But in your cabin, fashion is just a synonym for insulation. You aren't wearing pajamas. You are wearing a multi-layered defensive system designed to keep your internal organs from reaching the ambient temperature of the local creek. You are sleeping fully clothed, and honestly, you feel less like a human being and more like a very large, very itchy onion. Mainstream history often depicts pioneers in clean, white nightshirts, looking like they've just stepped out of a Victorian laundry commercial. The reality was much more utilitarian. You are wearing your thickest linsey woolsey trousers, a heavy flannel shirt, and a wool waistcoat that you haven't taken off since November. But the most important piece of your nightly ensemble is the nightcap. This isn't just a whimsical accessory for a Dickensian ghost story, it's a critical piece of survival gear. Scientists tell us that while you lose 80% of your heat through your head, theory is a bit of an exaggeration. In a room that is currently freezing, your scalp is a massive radiator for your core temperature. Your nightcap is a thick, conical wool hat that you pull down over your ears and eyebrows until you look like a very stressed garden gnome. There is a quirky, somewhat scratchy tidbit about pioneer hygiene. Because water has to be hauled from a frozen well and heated over a fire, you don't change for bed. You simply add layers. You might put on a second pair of socks, thick, hand-knitted wool that smells faintly of sheep lanolin, and perhaps a neckerchief made of old silk or cotton to keep the drafts from sliding down your collar. You compare this to the modern athleisure trend. People today wear yoga pants and compression shirts to feel active. You are wearing survival leisure, a collection of heavy, natural fibers that provide compression by being so stiff and thick that you can barely bend your knees. If you tried to do a burpee in this outfit, you'd probably just tip over like a felled tree and stay there until someone winched you back up. Historians still argue whether the fully clothed sleep of the frontier was primarily a response to the cold or a lingering cultural modesty from a time when an entire family, and sometimes a passing stranger, shared the same small room. Some scholars suggest that sleeping in your day clothes was a readiness strategy. If the chimney caught fire or a wolf got into the chicken coop, you didn't want to be fumbling for your trousers in sub-zero temperatures. To you, the debate is secondary to the fact that the wool is currently exfoliating your skin with every breath. You have reached a state of tactile saturation where the itchiness of the wool has become a background hum, like the static on a radio. The sensory experience of sleeping in layers is one of restricted movement. You can't toss and turn in the way a modern sleeper does. Your clothes have a high coefficient of friction against the corn husk mattress and the bearskin rug. If you want to roll over, you have to engage in a coordinated, three-stage physical maneuver that involves bracing your core and pivoting your entire torso as a single unit. You are a human cylinder. You realize that your modern bed, with its slippery silk sheets and lightweight duvets, is designed for agile sleeping. Your current bed is designed for static endurance. There's also the issue of your face. While the rest of your body is encased in wool and fur, your nose and cheeks are exposed to the indoor weather. You've tried the scarf mask technique, wrapping a piece of cloth around your lower face to catch the warmth of your own breath. It works for about 10 minutes until the moisture from your breath begins to condense and freeze, turning the scarf into a stiff, icy board that smells like a damp basement. You eventually give up and just let your nose be cold, hoping that the tips of your ears are sufficiently tucked into the nightcap. You've developed a pioneer tuck, a way of shrugging your shoulders and pulling your chin down until you are essentially a turtle made of flannel. You think about the comfort of modern clothing, the soft tagless tees, the elastic waistbands, the brushed fleece. Those things feel like a distant, impossible future. In your world, every piece of clothing has a texture, a weight, and a history. This waistcoat was made from your father's old coat. These socks were knitted by your sister during a long summer evening. Your clothes aren't just fabric. They are a record of your family's labor. They are heavy with the effort it took to shear the sheep, spin the yarn, and weave the cloth. It's a literal weight of the past that you carry with you into sleep. As the night continues, the layers of wool begin to trap a modest amount of heat. You reach a state of stagnant warmth, where the air between your flannel shirt and your skin is finally a reasonable temperature. It's a fragile victory. If you move too suddenly or lift an arm, you break the seal, letting a fresh stream of 30-degree air into your microclimate. So, you remain perfectly still. You become a statue, a monument to the art of not moving. You find yourself focusing on the rhythmic rustle of the corn husks every time you take a deep breath. There's a strange psychological effect to being so heavily clothed. It creates a sense of armored sleep. You don't feel vulnerable to the world. You feel like you're wearing a suit of mail made of sheep's hair. It's a very grounded, physical way to exist. You aren't just a mind floating in a dream. You are a very solid, very heavy object occupying space in a very cold room. You start to understand why the pioneers were often described as sturdy. It wasn't just their character, it was their wardrobe. As you drift back toward the edges of a dream, you find yourself wondering if people in the future will ever miss this feeling of weight. They'll have their temperature-controlled bedrooms and their 5-ounce pajama sets, but will they ever know the profound, heavy security of being wrapped in 4 different types of wool and a dead bear? Probably not. They'll trade the weight for the comfort, the itch for the soft cotton. But for tonight, you embrace the itch. You embrace the nightcap. You let the heavy woolen armor protect you from the invisible arrows of the frost. You close your eyes, the scent of lanolin and old wood smoke filling your nightcap, and let the sheer weight of your existence pull you down into the last, deepest hour of the night. The transition from the deepest part of the night to the first. Gray-blue smudge of dawn isn't marked by sunrise you can actually see. Instead, it's marked by change in the texture of your own breath. You wake up not because of an alarm clock or the sun hitting your face, but because the air entering your nostrils has become so cold it feels like inhaling tiny, microscopic shards of glass. You try to shift your head, but there is a strange, resistant crunch near your chin. It's not the corn husks this time. You realize with a groggy sense of dread that the moisture from your own respiration has spent the last 4 hours performing a very slow, very focused science experiment on your bedding. You have blanket frost. Mainstream history often notes that 19th century cabins were notorious for their lack of insulation, but it's hard to grasp the reality of a home where it is literally snowing on the inside. Because your cabin is essentially a wooden box with zero thermal break, the warm, moist air from your lungs and the bodies of your family rises, hits the sub-zero surface of the logs or the underside of the roof, and immediately undergoes desublimation. It turns directly from a gas to a solid. You look up, and in the dim pre-dawn light, the interior of your home looks like it's been decorated by a particularly vengeful ice queen. The logs aren't brown anymore. They are coated in a shimmering white fur of hoarfrost. It's beautiful in a "this might actually kill me" sort of way. It's like living inside a freezer that hasn't been defrosted since the McKinley administration. There is a quirky tidbit of frontier life regarding frost reading. Some settlers claimed they could tell exactly how cold it had gotten during the night by measuring the distance the frost had crept down the quilt. If the frost was only near your mouth, it was a one blanket chill. If the frost had reached your chest, it was a bitter snap. If you woke up and the frost had covered the entire top layer of the bear skin, you simply didn't get out of bed until noon because the world outside was clearly finished. You compare this to your modern smartphone's weather app. You know how you check the feels like temperature before deciding which jacket to wear? Your feels like gauge is currently the half-inch of ice crystals attached to your own chest hair. It's a very analog way to check the forecast. Historians still argue whether the persistent dampness caused by this indoor frost contributed more to the legendary frontier cough than the wood smoke did. Some scholars suggest that the constant cycle of freezing and thawing inside the walls created a breeding ground for mold that would make a modern building inspector faint. Others point out that the sheer, killing cold of the winter likely sterilized most pathogens, leaving the pioneers with lungs that were structurally sound but socially soot-plated. To you, the debate is mostly academic. Your immediate concern is the ice anchor. Because you've been breathing into the edge of the quilt, the fabric has frozen to your beard, or, if you're clean-shaven, to the flannel of your nightshirt. To move your head is to receive a very sudden, very cold wax treatment. The sensory experience of the frosty wake-up is one of extreme stillness. You don't want to move because movement breaks the delicate frozen seal of your microclimate. If you stir, those beautiful shimmering crystals on the logs will be jarred loose by the vibration and fall onto your face like a spray of icy needles. You are trapped in a game of statue with the laws of thermodynamics. You look at your spouse and children, their heads tucked deep into the quilt sandwich, and you can see the little plumes of vapor rising from their hidden faces like steam from a group of very small, very tired locomotives. You think about the modern luxury of a dehumidifier. You know that sleek white machine that hums in your basement, pulling moisture out of the air and collecting it in a plastic bucket so your shoes don't get mildewy? You are currently the dehumidifier. Your lungs, your skin, and your blankets are the collection system. Except instead of a plastic bucket, the moisture is being stored as a crystalline structure on your eyelashes. It's a very efficient system, provided you don't mind waking up looking like a glazed donut. There's a strange, muffled quality to the sound in the cabin this morning. The frost on the walls acts as a natural acoustic dampener, making the room feel even smaller and more insulated than it actually is. The wind has finally died down, leaving behind a silence so thick you can hear the blood pumping in your ears. It's a heavy silence, the kind that only exists when the world is buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. You realize that you've survived the peak of the storm. The cabin held, the mud stayed in the cracks. The cow is still breathing in the corner. You can see her breath blooming in the dark like a large, rhythmic ghost. You find yourself staring at a single frost crystal on the edge of the bearskin. It's a perfect, six-sided star, reflecting the dull red glow of the final embers in the hearth. It's an incredible piece of natural engineering, a tiny masterpiece of geometry created entirely by the fact that you didn't die of hypothermia in your sleep. There's a certain grim pride in that. You and your family have generated enough heat to create weather patterns inside your own house. You are a biological engine, a walking, breathing furnace that has successfully defied the void for another 8 hours. But the blue hour is passing, and the reality of the morning is starting to settle in. The frost isn't going to melt itself. In fact, as soon as you start the fire, the frost is going to rain. This is one of those pioneer experiences that the movies always skip over. When the room warms up, all that beautiful hoarfrost on the ceiling and the upper logs is going to liquefy and drip down onto everything you own. The transition from frozen and dry to thawing and soggy is the most miserable part of the day. You have about 20 minutes of dry cold left before the cabin turns into a very cold, very damp cave. You compare this to a modern defrost cycle. You know when you get into your car and the windshield is covered in ice and you have to sit there for 10 minutes while the air slowly clears a tiny hole so you can see? You are about to do that for your entire life. You are the defrost button for the cabin. You take a deep breath, feeling the frost on your collar crack and fall away. The itch of the wool, the weight of the bearskin, the smell of the cow, it's all still there, waiting for you. You've negotiated another night with the frontier, and while you come out of it a little bit glittery and a lot bit cold, you've come out of it alive. You close your eyes for one last precious minute, listening to the silence of the frost before the first chore of the day calls you back to the world of the living. You finally commit to the movement. You peel back the heavy, frost-rimmed bearskin, and the transition is like a physical assault. The human lasagna of your family shifts and groans as you break the collective seal of warmth, letting the sub-zero room air rush into the huddle. Your feet find the puncheon floor and it feels like stepping onto a sheet of dry ice. You remember that one poster bed you were cursing last night? Right now, it's the only thing keeping you from the literal frozen earth. You shuffle toward the hearth, your joints creaking in a rhythmic protest that matches the wood's own contracting groans. Your first task isn't to check your notifications or even to put on a pot of coffee. It's to perform a manual reboot of your entire life support system. As you blow the banked embers back into a roar, the cabin undergoes its most treacherous daily phase, the thaw. Mainstream history often ignores the morning rain that occurred inside pioneer homes. As the temperature in the room rises from killing frost to merely freezing, all the hoarfrost you admired on the walls begins to liquefy. It's called the weeping of the logs. Water starts to drip from the ceiling, saturating your blankets and turning the dust on the floor into a thin gray slurry. You compare this to a modern software patch that fixes one bug but breaks 3 other things. You have heat now, but you're also getting a cold shower. You have to move the tick and the heavy furs away from the walls or they'll be mildewed by noon. There is a quirky tidbit of frontier reality that often surprises people. The first chore of the day wasn't eating. You might go 4 or 5 hours without a scrap of cornmeal because the structural integrity check came first. You walk the perimeter of your 15 by 15 foot world, inspecting the chinking and daubing you so painstakingly applied yesterday. You find a section near the door where the wind was particularly aggressive. The mud has cracked and fallen to the floor in frozen chunks, leaving a gap big enough to slide a hand through. The negotiation has failed in this specific sector. You see the pile of river clay you left by the fire, now a lukewarm puddle of muck, and you realize your morning workout is already scheduled. Historians still argue whether this relentless cycle of morning repairs, this daily battle against a disintegrating house, contributed to a specific frontier psychology of stoic resilience, or if it was simply a recipe for chronic generational exhaustion that we've mislabeled as grit. Some scholars suggest that the pioneers' obsession with order was a direct trauma response to the fact that their walls were literally trying to fall apart every single night. To you, holding a handful of cold mud and stuffing it back into a crack while your stomach growls, the debate feels like a luxury for people who have never had to reapply their own insulation before. Breakfast. You look over at Bessie. The cow is staring at you with a look of profound bovine judgment, her breath still blooming in the dim light. She's ready to go back outside, and frankly, you're ready for her to leave too. The bovine heater has done its job, but the bovine aroma is reaching a critical mass as the room warms up. You unlatch the heavy door, and the sunlight, blindingly bright against the fresh snow, hits you like a physical weight. The world outside is a silent white void. The storm has passed, leaving behind a landscape so pristine it looks fake, like a high-definition screensaver. You stand there for a moment, the cold air stinging your lungs, and realize you've done it. You survived the night. You return to the hearth, where the fire is now high enough to start the edible experiment that is breakfast. It's just cornmeal mush again, a dish that has the flavor profile of a wet cardboard box but the caloric density of lead. As the water boils, you look at your family. They are emerging from the blankets, their hair messy and their eyes red from the smoke, but they are alive. You've successfully navigated the gunshot cracks of the logs, the smelly bear skins, the spicy rock for your feet, and the absolute darkness of the long winter night. You are a part of a long, unbroken chain of humans who refuse to be extinguished by a bit of bad weather and a leaky roof. The vigilant sleep is over, replaced by the vigilant day. You'll spend the next 10 hours chopping more wood, hauling more water, and fighting the crying walls with rags and heat. It's a repetitive, exhausting, and incredibly boring existence. But as you take that first sip of lukewarm water, you feel a sense of accomplishment that a modern person, with their central heating and their grocery delivery apps, might never truly understand. You didn't just pass the time tonight, you earned the morning. You close your eyes for a second, feeling the warmth of the fire on your face, and let the quiet of the snow-covered woods settle into your soul. The frontier is still there, waiting for you to make a mistake, but for now, you've won. You take a breath, pick up the mud bucket, and start the day. Now, as our journey through the drafty logs and heavy furs comes to a close, let the weight of those blankets settle over you in your own world. The whistling wind of the 1800s is gone, replaced by the soft, steady hum of your room. The gunshot cracks of the timber have faded into a gentle, rhythmic silence. You are safe, you are warm. The floor beneath you is steady, and the air you breathe is clear and soft. Your work for today is done, and unlike the pioneer, you have no mud to mix, no fire to bank, and no crying walls to dry. Feel the tension leave your shoulders, sinking deep into your mattress. Imagine the heavy bearskin is now just a soft, weightless cloud, anchoring you gently to the present. The rhythmic chewing of Bessie has become the slow, steady beat of your own heart. You are drifting away from the frozen woods, back toward the shore of a deep, dreamless sleep. The sun will rise in its own time, but for now, the darkness is your friend. It is a soft, velvet curtain, closing on the worries of the day. Sleep now, knowing that the morning will wait. You have earned this rest. You are tucked away, shielded from the storm, and the world is quiet.